so as you said, I'm Kyle Cordes. So I'll talk about me in a minute. I want to ask about you guys first. How many people here know what software as a service is? How many people here have worked in or on a software as a service company of any kind? A couple? Okay. Good to know the audience. Okay, I'm trying to figure out where to stand where I don't get the projector in my face, so we'll just hope this works. I hate about me slides, so I'm now taken to just saying blah, blah, blah. What you really want to know about me is about my software as a service experience. You should believe what I have to say about it proportionately to my credibility in the specific topic. And specifically, I had a company listed here. It was in a vertical market. The company I started in 2004 with a co-founder. Then we sold it in 2009. And we learned a whole lot along the way. And almost everything we have here are things I learned along the way. This is actually a revised version of the talk I gave in 2006, where I had learned about half of this. Was anybody at my 2006 Code Camp talk? Fantastic. I'm not repeating information. I can just change things and nobody will even know the difference. Okay. I'm also going to do something a little bit unconventional that almost no speaker ever does. And that is that when I gave this,
was that at Microsoft?
When I gave this talk before, I did not use slides. Now, I use slides today because I figured we'd have fancy projectors, but I didn't use slides. I just made these handouts that have the key notes. So I'm going to hand out the handouts like I did last time. You can ignore them. You can keep them. You can check and see if I really say the same things I cover on there. You can mock me, whatever you want to do. Okay. So let's say you have an idea for some software. I'm going to encourage you with what you can do with this idea. Okay? You can start with an idea for software. You can fire up your IDE, whatever tools you use, and that is a very powerful thing to do. The thing that's powerful about firing up your IDE is not just that you can fire it up at work on the job. You can turn it on at home, and you can write some software. You will own that software. How many people here only ever code at work? How many people write software sometimes at home for fun? I know. Fantastic. Wonderful. Okay. So you have a level of power you don't realize by the fact that you own that software, and you can then choose what to do with that software. One of the things you can do with that software is to sell it as a service, and that's what this talk is going to be about. It's about the business of doing that. But you can choose to do things like just keep the software for yourself and never show anybody. You can give it away as open source. You can publish it as a code sample on your website. By the way, anybody who ever interviews, I would heartily recommend that. Write some software you're proud of and post it somewhere that potential employers can look at it. It's much better to not just talk in the abstract about what kind of things you can create, but to say, here's an example of something I created. But that's just an aside. Let's get back to software as a service. Question. Is writing the software, is that the whole job? How many people think all you got to do is write the software? Nobody good. Okay. I'm actually going to argue that there's 5 major parts of creating and delivering a software solution. And you could probably get somebody who's an expert in this to come up with 87 major parts instead. But I'm going to talk about 5. 5 major parts of the software business. It's a lot more than just delivering software. The first thing is you actually have to deliver some bits. This is an image. Oh, wait. All the images you see here are Creative Commons licensed stuff from Flickr that I just searched and picked up some things that looked kind of neat to put on for an image. This is some piece of software. It's a pocket Wikipedia and a QX. But this is, I'd argue that delivering the software today or in the last 15 years is really the easiest part about software, about selling your software. You can make it available for download. You can burn it on 50-cent DVDs and mail it out, whatever. So that's almost irrelevant. But that is one. But still, it's one of the key 5 things about selling software for the software business. As important as that is the license to use that software. So, how many people have ever read a click-through license?
All the way through?
All the way through, end to end.
One, I guess.
So for the record, 3 people out of the room have actually read a click-through license. Reading it as an end user, I confess, I hardly ever read them either. But there's actually something really important in there, which is the right to use that software and right to use it in what way, for how long, by how, by who, by how many users. And that is incredibly important to major important categories of customers. So, the kid down the street doesn't really care about the click-through license. But big companies that are trying to get the right to do something important with your software you've made, they care a lot about those details. So that license to use the software, some kind of, either it's a written contract or maybe it's just covered by copyright law, but that license to use what you've created is the second major aspect of what a software business has to deliver. The third is actually running the software on some computer somewhere. Hosting is a really big deal. It's maybe not as much of a big deal now as it was a few decades ago, but it's a fairly big pain to run large-scale software in data centers. Does anybody who works as a system administrator? Okay, one? Okay. There's actually a whole profession there. Some of us that are in the software world that then step into the software business world, maybe are not as aware going in as we could have been, in my case, about a lot of the practice behind large-scale sysadmin. And I said, even as someone who worked as a manager of sysadmins in the past, when you actually dig in to do it, to dig in to do sysadmin, to build an organization doing sysadmin, for software systems that companies rely on for 24/7 operations, that is a really big deal. And I think that's the third major part of what a software business can deliver. The next part is the actual operation. So this is the hosting, running the server, running the software on some servers. This is actually tinkering with it to make it do the right thing for the customer. Now, when you go buy something off the shelf, you don't do this, right? Or when you sell something off the shelf, it's the buyer's problem to go set it up for their own use. But as a software business, you could choose to do that operational part, actually configure the software correctly and keep it working correctly. And then lastly, you can do support. Support is users call with troubles and you help them. There's an inside joke at the bottom here, anybody who's sitting close enough. Okay, so of those 5 pieces, if you've ever worked in a consulting business, you could do any or all of those 5 parts. By the way, this is all the stuff downstream from writing the software. You'll notice that my item 0 unstated was write the software. But if you work in a consulting kind of way, or I would argue even if you're working as an employee somewhere, you could do all 5 of those kinds of work on some body of software, and you would just sell it by the hour, or by the project, whatever, that sort of thing. That's a really easy kind of business to understand. A second very well understood model is where you put your software in a box and you sell it. Now, if you think about it, you're not putting all 5 of those major areas in the box. You're just putting the first 2 things in a box. So if we go back here a few, you're shipping the software in a box, and the box might be a zip file, and you're including the license to use. And if you've ever been involved in a large company software purchase, they'll actually send contracts back and forth and negotiate them. So the licensing work is some give and take. If you just buy something off the shelf at Best Buy, it's one of those click-through licenses I mentioned. But then these other 3 parts are not part of the deal on commercial off-the-shelf, just shipped software. Typically, the people who buy it, their problem is to do hosting, their problem is to make it run, and their problem is to support their users. Now, they might eventually call you with the trouble, but when you sell enterprise software, typically the people at the edge, the end users, they don't call you first. They call their own software organization first. And I should point out here that I'm mostly talking about enterprise software. That's what I know. That's the big thing in St. Louis. Almost everyone that I know of in St. Louis is in some way working on enterprise software as opposed to commercial, like games, that sort of thing. Okay, so back here to our license sale. You might sell a service contract that adds on that support piece, but it's not really part of the initial sale. Well, what software as a service is essentially taking all 5 pieces and selling them all together as one big bundle. So you're going to write the software, is my 0 item. You're going to provide the software, the right to use the software. You're going to run some servers to run it on. You're going to make it actually work on those servers day after day after day. And you're going to take phone calls from the people using it to help them out with any troubles they have. Then to make the as-a-service part includes both the full service package and it says something about the pricing model. The pricing model for software as a service will always work something like this. It'll be per something. It won't be a one-time purchase. It might be per month, might be per hour, might be per user, might be per transaction. There are software packages you can buy that process various kinds of financial transactions that are priced per 10,000 transactions. So every time you tick off 10,000 transactions, you pay the vendor X dollars. there are even a few cases, these are kind of rare, but there are a few cases of software being sold where it's priced as a percentage of the dollar value of the transaction that it's used to process. I see a head shaking. If you work with software like this?
And credit systems.
Okay, so in credit systems is where this kind of thing can sometimes happen. And I like some of these models because some of these models align the interest of the vendor and the customer much more than the consulting model. With consulting, one of the big issues with consulting is that, in a sense, it's in the consultant's interest to deliver bad software, because bad software is going to make there need to be more hours. Now, I despise bad software. I don't deliver bad software on purpose, but there's this perverse incentive. It actually might be in a consulting firm's interest to make something bad. It's another little aside for you. But if you're charging this percent of the transaction amount, if your software is bad so your transactions don't work, it is clearly never in your interest to make transactions not happen if that's how you're being paid. Because of that per unit time issue, anybody recognize this pop culture reference?
Yes.
Yeah,
Holy
okay.
grail.
So this is the holy grail of business is recurring revenue. Are there any MBAs in the room? You're an MBA. Yeah. Only one MBA in the room. Yeah, I mean, recurring revenue is where it's at. Well, software as a service businesses, by one of these metrics, will have recurring revenue. The software either keeps being used more hours, keeps being used by more users, more months, more transactions. And because of that, I thought I'd just hand draw something to here. When you ship your software in a box, you get a revenue model like that on the left. So as bursts of revenue arrive from time to time. In a software as a service business, unless you're doing it terribly wrong, you will get a revenue model much more like this. It might be slow to start, but once it starts, almost every month, year, or whatever, you'll get most of the same revenue you got before, and if you're any good at all, you're going to pick up some more customers, and you're going to get this steady growth. Now, if you do really well, you might get this thing, we might shoot for the stars there. But once a software as a service business is off the ground, it actually tends to have, just by the nature, by the inertia present in all human beings, once you're paying for a service, does anybody ever realize that they've been paying for a cable channel they haven't ever watched? Right?
Or 100.
Or 100, right? It's part of our nature. Once we as humans get used to the idea of paying for something every month, we tend to just keep doing it forever. That applies to Fortune 50 companies just as much as it applies to a single individual human being. Once customers start buying a service that's priced per unit time, they keep buying it. Churn is the number you use to measure what percentage of your customers from one month to the next go away. And with reasonably good software as a service, and like Salesforce.com, that kind of thing, your churn, they're always going to be single-digit percentages, sometimes less than that. In my software as a service business, our churn was very, very low. Once customers started using it, they hardly ever would stop using it. Okay. So what do customers like about software as a service? And this is one where I have more written on the page here, so I'll talk through this a while. The number one thing that customers like is that they aren't taking the risk in their initial purchase that your software will stink. Everybody has had buyer's remorse on something they've bought, and I've had buyer's remorse on things I've bought. But when your model, I might actually use this blackboard here. When over time you spent your money like that, and then maybe you buy a couple of upgrades later. The problem here is that this is cash flow over time. The problem is right about here is where you suddenly realize that what you bought is not very good, right? And customers know this because the last 3 times they bought some piece of software, they realized the month after they bought it that it's not very good. Well, with software as a service, you're pricing it per transaction or month or so on. You have taken that risk as a vendor. They're not taking that risk because if it stinks after month 1, they're not going to. They're going to be part of that churn. They're going to call you and say, you know what, we're not going to do another month. So the flip side of every one of these, by the way, is that the thing that the customer likes is a cost that you take on as a software as a service vendor. So the fact that the customer is not putting money up front, taking the risk, means that as a vendor, you're taking the risk. So to accommodate that customer, in my chart there, instead of the customer paying this money, the customer just started paying this little bit of money. And so to serve that customer in month 1, you might have to go invest and buy some more servers. If you're using Amazon EC2, you might have to rev up some more instances, whatever. And so as a vendor, you take a little bit of risk. The customer takes less risk. They're happy. I would argue this is a win because as the vendor, you are in a much better position to make an informed decision about the risk of how good your software is. Whereas the customer might be getting snowed by some marketing. As the vendor, you know your software is no good. You know it's good to take the risk. Second thing customers really, really like is that they're not in the business of making it actually run. So in my company, we had some racks of servers, and we operated it on behalf of our customers. They didn't buy servers. That means they didn't spend time evaluating servers. They didn't have to put together capital asset plans for buying those servers. They didn't have to go to their financial people and get permission to buy the servers. They didn't have to hire system administrators to make those servers keep running. They didn't have to negotiate for generators and so on. We took care of that. And we actually further outsourced it to a colo, which is what I would recommend. But that whole area of pain of running the software on some computers completely goes away for the customer in the software as a service. By the way, I think everything here applies equally well to platforms as a service and infrastructure as a service and all those other things that all the vendors will tell you. But that's not my expertise. I'm going to talk about my expertise. The next thing customers really like, scaling up. So, so my software was sold per user per month. It's not the only way to do it, but that's how we did it. If our customers were they would get more business, right? So they'd have a good day. They got out of their business. They'd go hire some people. And they hire 20 more people to do some new business that they just signed. Well, our software that we provided them trivially scaled up from their point of view. They just clicked a couple buttons and added those 20 users, and then their bill got 20 users bigger. If they lost that work and they got rid of those 20 people, then their bill will go down by those 20 people. That easy scaling just makes the customer's life enormously easier from a business and management point of view. Customers really like that. And I said a few minutes ago, for everything that helps the customer, there's a cost from that on the vendor side. On the vendor side, that means you have to be prepared for that. That means as a vendor, you need to be ready. You need to have done some capacity planning so that when the customer scales up, so you sold them this package, you said you can scale up anytime. As a vendor, you need to have servers ready, policies in place to hire system engineers, all those things that a business would need, that they would have needed, and now you need to handle that scaling. But customers like it, you do it. And something I hit on here is that as a software as a service vendor running a whole bunch of instances of the same software, you have a much easier time dealing with these problems. So let's say the customer's putting in their own instance of a piece of software. They're putting in an Exchange server, for example. This might be the first Exchange server they've put in, or it might be the first Exchange server they've put in since some major patch came out, something like that. That means that they're going to be going through this learning process. But as a software as a service vendor, let's say that you're providing some package, some email service to them. Well, you run that same package all day, every day for a whole bunch of your customers. So you, as a vendor, can deal with these hosting pain, the management, the scaling up. You can deal with that so much more easily and cheaply than the customer can, that it ends up being a win-win all around. So it's not purely you taking the pain from them. It's they get less pain, and they save this much pain, and maybe you gain this much pain because you have this economy of scale because you're operating a whole bunch of instances of your same package. There are some things that customers do not particularly care for about software as a service. The first is that when a customer buys a package and runs it in-house, they have complete control over it. So they can decide like when to upgrade new versions. They can decide when to add more features to it if they have the source code. They can decide when to run it on bigger servers, that sort of thing. They can decide how to finance paying for it. There's all kinds of control they have. And they give up some of that control. Now, you do your best as a vendor to give them back that control. So if they say, we want to spend more money and run and have faster servers, you say, send me more money and there'll be faster servers. So you work hard to give them back the control that they lost as part of the nature of the arrangement, but no matter how hard you work, there will always be some level of control that a customer would have had if they ran an in-house system that they don't have because they subscribe to your software as a service instead. And that's the thing that customers sometimes don't like. Closely related to that is leverage. If in an arrangement where the customer buys it, the customer has like great leverage over you, like right before they buy it. Obviously, they have somewhat less leverage right after they bought it. Then they get more leverage when you're trying to persuade them to pay for an upgrade, that sort of thing. It's very different in the software as a service world. The software as a service world, basically, the longer you've been running a system for a customer, the more reliant they are on that system. So, like, let's say this far into my graph, whatever, this far into my graph. If you're a software as a service vendor, so the customer might be happy with the amount of money they're paying as it goes up and down over here. But like, if they decide all of a sudden they really want to try to squeeze you as a vendor to pay this much instead of this much, they don't really have a lot of way to do that because they've ended up, like, they have to subscribe to your service because they've made their company run, like, organized around your software that you've sold them. And yet, like, there's nowhere to go. There's no short-term easy answer. They can't say, we're just going to hold off upgrading, that sort of thing. So some customers really don't like that. They prefer to have an arrangement where there's these occasional sporadic bursts of money because they feel that that gives them more opportunities to negotiate on how big those bursts of money are going to be. So that's we have that just a few times. It's not too bad, but sometimes requires a little bit of polite negotiation. The last fairly important bit, if a customer buys something from you once and then they have a permanent right to use it, that is an asset that they have. Now, I put the word unique in here. Let me explain that for a minute. If a customer buys an off-the-shelf package, then at bare minimum, they have something which can then be sold to someone else, right? If the customer buys custom development, then they might actually have a unique asset. They might have some special software that's just for them that they, like they could then sell that as a package themselves if they want to. Whereas if they just subscribe to your service, they don't have any asset at all. They only have an expense. Now, accountants like the simplicity of only having an expense, but executives who want to be able to buy and sell things, if they don't get something that they could sell, that's in a sense less value. I'm trying to think of a good example of where that would work out. I'll use the Exchange server example again. So company A buys some servers, okay? They buy Exchange. They buy a bunch of licenses for clients. They hire some people to run it. They now have something that could be sold. So they could take that part of their organization. They could sell the part of their organization, or they could provide services to their sister companies if they're part of a conglomerate, that sort of thing. But they have something that's theirs. The opposite of that would be, let's say a company just subscribes to Salesforce.com. Well, all they have from Salesforce.com is a bill. Like, they don't even own a copy of the software that they're using, and so they don't have anything that they could sell. That most often comes into play when a company itself is going to be sold. If a company is going to be sold and it has some unique in-house software, then that unique in-house software can add to the value of the software of the company being sold. If a company is being sold and it only has some subscriptions to some services, then those subscriptions are clearly not going to add to the value. In fact, the fact that they're on the hook for these subscription fees might actually reduce the value of the company being sold. And so sometimes, in certain scenarios, depending on the kind of company you're doing business with, they may regret the fact that they signed up for a service instead of buying something because now they can't sell it to somebody else. Okay. This is the big one. See my worms here? It's a can of worms to open. So customers of enterprise systems almost always have something unique about their company, their enterprise, which is different from all the other enterprises, even the ones that are in the same business. For example, trash company A and trash company B both haul trash, right? They're in the exact same business, and yet it's likely that the executives in charge of trash company B have some unique way of doing business that they believe deeply sets them apart from trash company A, and they would like the software to know about that unique bit about how they do business. Maybe their bills look different. Maybe they charge based on the phase of the moon. Who knows? Customers come with all kinds of things to want. But there's something they want. If they bought an off-the-shelf package that they're running in their data center, well, if they bought it with source code, they could actually edit it. Even if they didn't buy it with source code, they could integrate it with some other in-house software they have to provide this special functionality. But if all they do is subscribe to a service, then they really don't have the technical means or access to go make changes or additions, glom things on to the software they're using. So is everybody clear on the scenario I'm explaining? With some nods or some no's? Okay, I'm not sure to explain it in much detail. So in that scenario, so that customer, my trash company B in my example, they want to add a feature, a phase of the moon-based billing, right? So they come to the vendor. Well, if the vendor, I won't go back to the slides, if the vendor was a consulting firm who's building them a custom trash billing system, then the vendor will be thrilled. The vendor will say, you have a new requirement. Well, here's an estimate, here's a plan, let's get the work going. I myself have a consulting firm, and that's what I would do. A customer using an off-the-shelf billing system, so this enterprise software off-the-shelf billing systems are always customizable. So, and I can't think of the name of one offhand, but if you're using any of them, you can call the vendor up, you can say, we need some customizations, and they will have a professional services division. They'll dispatch some people to your office, and they will get you some prices, and they will customize the thing to do what you need it to do. In a software as a service scenario, so the company, they don't have their own servers, they don't have their own software, they don't have their own people, all they do is pay a monthly bill for access. Those first two things are not nearly as available. So they have to come to you as the vendor and say, will you make the software that we rent access to? Will you make it do my new phase of the moon feature? Well, here's some things you can tell them. You can just tell them no. Now, is anybody familiar with 37 Signals and their body of social commentary as well as work? So that's their answer, right? So they sell a very horizontal product. They actually sell software as a service. I mean, I think most or all of their offerings are software as a service offerings. But their answer is no. In fact, there's even a very interesting interview where one of them describes that they get so many suggestions and requests that they don't even bother to record them. Like, they don't even keep a database of all the things people have asked for, because at any given moment they can open their email box and there's another 5,000 requests for more feature additions. So, like, requests are so abundant that there's no reason to even store them. I've always worked way at the other end of the industry, not in the horizontal market, in the enterprise market where you have a small number of big customers. It's a much more typical scenario. Telling them no is not a real great idea. First, because they might leave. But secondly, because you're really not meeting their needs in any meaningful way. If a huge company is trying to get a competitive advantage by billing based on the phase of the moon, then you need to help them do that. So I don't really recommend saying no to valid, useful requests for customizations. Now, I guess if you get some idiotic requests, you might say no. But in most cases, you don't want to say no. An obvious thing that customers can ask for is, well, what if you just charge us per hour? It's going to take you 100 hours, charge us for 100 hours of consulting work to add this feature to the software. I do not recommend ever doing that because it opens a can of worms. You get a whole bunch of these all over your desk if you do that. And the reason is, and I go into that a little bit more in the very last section of the handout, it's very hard for customers to understand if they've paid for the development of X that they don't own X. And in a software as a service offering, you don't transfer ownership of the software to the customers. You're just renting access to it. So if they pay for you to enhance it, it's still yours because it's a derivative work. The enhancement's a derivative work. There's really no way to even structure a contract that makes them own that enhancement if it's integrated right in the middle of your application. And yet, it's very hard for customers to accept that reality. So for that reason, I do not recommend hourly charging. Go ahead.
Have you got problems in the back end of that then, or is it just front end problems? Are people suing to try to get access to that derivative work?
I understood this well enough for our scenario to not ever go down this road. I've occasionally heard a few stories of companies that went down this road. The reason that we felt it would not work out was on the back end. So even if on the front end, the customer understands, agrees, and signs some contracts, they understand, even though they're paying by the hour for enhancement, this is just an enhancement to the core product. It's not their code. That 2 years down the road, maybe the people that you work with have been replaced with other new people, and they know that they paid this bill for 1,000 hours of development at X dollars per hour. It's going to be really hard to convince them that they don't own what they got for that, no matter what the contract says.
So then what was in the stories that you heard, what were the side effects of that?
Angry customers.
Angry customers.
Angry customers.
All right.
I mean, you got to make the contract completely clear.
Yeah.
It's your software. They don't own it just because they pay. Like you did this much work, they paid for this much work to customize it. They clearly can't own this body of software that they would have to have to use that last little bit.
Yeah.
But I don't recommend going down that path.
I was just going to point that out. I actually went down this path.
Oh,
You don't have enough worms on the screen?
I don't have enough work.
I actually had an entire company they took it to litigation. They paid for a customization to an application, small piece of it, but then demanded that they wanted their small piece out of it. I'm like, I can't give you the piece. It's part of the whole. It's like, well, we thought we were. No, you didn't think that. You signed the contract. So, yeah, long story short, it's a nightmare, and I'll never do it again. So
don't take his word for it. Don't do that. It's a can of worms.
Yeah.
If your business needs to eliminate that feature later, and it would make sense for the rest of your customers, you're kind of bound by that relationship.
Exactly. Something related to that I have done that worked out okay was to simply say, if the feature was on our roadmap to do anyway, we might not have gotten to it for 4 or 5 years, but it was a good feature. We agree our software should have this feature. We will have the feature eventually. You could get the customer to pay an expedite fee to implement what they would have implemented sooner. And if you use those words, for some reason when people pay something called an expedite fee, they do not get to thinking that they paid for 100 hours of labor, therefore you better send them the result of that labor. I don't know why. It must be something psychological, but something like that can work. I see you curious.
Yeah, I was just writing that down. I didn't quite understand what the approach was behind the expedite fee.
So the approach is, and this only works if the customer asks for something that you probably would have done it anyway eventually. So let's say you have, this is your product pipeline, okay? You got some small features, some big features, some really big features, some small features. This is time going across, right? And so right now you're right here. You're working on feature 1. By the way, I know this is going to be invisible in video. The customer desperately needs that. So it's something that's on your roadmap. So maybe this was 2010, and that feature was out in 2013. Now, it's a whole separate question, do I really recommend trying to figure out what you're going to implement 3 years from now? Probably not in general, but occasionally it makes sense to figure out that some feature is a really great idea, valuable for everybody involved, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because you had to make prioritization decisions. You only have so many developers, you only have so many dollars, only so many hours in the day. You simply move that item up here instead and tell the customer, I will move that item up, that we would have done anyway, and that will cost you $X to do that. So this only works for, I'll make a term here, generic customizations. So it's a customization in the sense that it's something that the customer wants, but it's a generic feature of the software. It's available to all users for all purposes. You can do something like that, and you can tell this story to a customer, and this avoids the problem you described.
I like it.
And that's actually a pretty good way to go. And an even simpler way to go, and I actually recommend this one the most, and that is if you have some subset of your customers who really, really want some features that you don't have. Maybe they're big enterprise customers, so they can afford to pay for features. But you don't want to charge them these various kinds of fees because of the issue you brought up and others. You can simply just make it as an offering. If you want to increase the charge, so our earlier slide is either a percentage of transaction per user per month, however you do it, you can simply offer to add the features they want in some time frame. If they will agree that once those features are there, they will pay an extra $1 per 10,000 transactions or an extra $5 per user per month, whatever your unit of billing is. And I actually think that's a pretty good way of doing it, because if the customer bought this much functionality on some pricing model, and they want to add this much more to the end, I think it makes a lot of sense to your default position to be that they should use the same pricing model to pay for that little bit at the end as they paid for the main body of what they bought. Go ahead.
Do you consider maybe also like the World of Warcraft model where you give them like make them buy another box or something to get in, like the expansion kit type of thing? Just a temporary like gate key, sort of like the expedite fee, sort of, but.
I can only talk in great detail about what I did.
Okay.
And what I did in our business is we had just one offering, that everybody got the whole offering.
Okay.
But something you can do is you can price pieces of functionality separately. You can call them expansion packs if they're a game. You can call them feature additions, whatever you want to call them, if it's an enterprise package. So you might, some companies, especially in the off-the-shelf software business, have done it by module. For a long time, every accounting system in the whole world, for whatever reason, was sold by module. So you'd buy the core module, and you get general ledger, payables, and receivables, and there was a job costing module, and that was an extra $60,000. Well, if you're selling it software as a service, you could have, you get these modules for $1,000 a month, and the job costing module is another $100 a month. And that's basically what I'm saying here. So you could either add it to the core offering, or you could just make it an extra priced option. I actually recommend not doing too much of that, because then you're doing software development that you're only selling to maybe a small subset of your customers. And really, to be really successful, you need to get as much of the work as possible that you do to be sold to all of your customers who will then pay you. Yeah.
When you do this, is the customer involved in the design and the requirements definition of this, or is it really you're just paying for, we'll push it up and we do all of that?
The latter. So what we did, and I can tell you that this worked well for us, it may not be the only model, but what we did was we had a fairly strong rule that our customers do not design our product. Our customers tell us about their needs, I'll get you, about their needs in an abstract way. And even if they feel like sending over screen designs, we don't take those as gospel. We use those as input to our design process. So we try to create a horizontal, generic solution which can be configured in a way that meets the needs they communicated to us. And so what that also means, that also meshes well with these other ways of charging, because it may be that what the customer wants would only take 100 hours to implement, but it's a crappy hack that would make your product worse. Well, we're in the business of making our product better to get a whole bunch more revenue from a whole bunch more customers. We don't want to do a $100-hour crappy hack. We want to do the 500-hour well-designed implementation. And so we would simply ignore the fact that there exists a 100-hour crappy implementation. We would design the feature that we really need to implement to make our business successful, and we would price that in a way that makes sense for us and for our customer.
Obviously, this would have to be designed in from the beginning, but this kind of thing would be an issue with a particular product. Wouldn't the ideal solution be to provide APIs that give them hooks into the various kinds of things that they would want to customize, allowing them to do their own extensions or changes to things that can be parameterized on their side, where they would own that? Because the idea would be, if they have to build software, a little bit of software on their side that they own and manage, now they're even further coupled to your product and even more dependent on you.
That idea is extremely appealing in the abstract, and I've even done a little bit of what you described there. The part that we did was, the system we built was extremely configurable. It had a ridiculous number of knobs to turn and switches to flip. It's essentially the exact opposite of what the 37 Signals guys advocate of these extremely simple products that don't have any buttons or switches. Because we're selling to an enterprise market, our notion was that if we had a generic product and had a lot of reasonable switches, then customers could meet most of their needs by how they flip the switches. In a few cases, flipping the switches extended to being able to insert code. So we had some billing hooks, for example. You could insert some script in there, and it would do something outside. So you could configure the system to do A, B, C, D, E, and F, but you could write a little snippet of JavaScript code, I think is what we use, and shove it right in the middle there, and create arbitrary other results. That did not work out as well as you could imagine it working out. Because when you're in a software as a service business, typically customers want to sign up for that because they don't want to hire and employ programmers and manage programming projects. So if the answer to their request is, we want to be able to tweak, I'll use billing as we want to make our billing handle this phase of the moon situation. And your answer is, go hire some programmers. Here's some API docs. That's not real appealing to them because they don't want to hire programmers. So we found, I believe, that we used our hooks way more than our customers did. Somebody?
Yeah, if you could give us a little bit more concrete, example of what your service was.
I don't have internet in here. I think I actually mentioned the name of the company on here. If you Google it, did I mention it on here? You can contact me. I can show you the website.
Okay, that's fine.
The people that bought it kept its website in approximately its current form. So its website, which we created way back when, has several hundred pages of documentation and feature explanation and screenshots.
Okay.
So you can actually learn way more than I could ever talk in an hour just by clicking through.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And by the way, I have some marketing content that didn't make it into my slides that I'll mention if we. Where else? Yeah. Okay. I was hoping to talk about a little bit of software as a service marketing. Looks like we're about out of time. Okay, so let's see what else there is to hit. Okay, is anybody convinced now that they should be selling their software as a service instead of as a contractor or employee or something like that? Anybody revved up? 1, 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's already doing it, so.
Okay, so my firm was bootstrapped. We didn't take any investment capital. So I can tell a little bit of how you go about doing that, what that approach is. I actually have a lot of interest in taking a different kind of approach on my next turnaround. But the simplest way to get started on a software as a service bootstrap business is pick a market, have a little bit of money on hand, and just hack out version 1.0 that's good enough to get a paying customer. Sell enough customers to reach break even, and I didn't even fill in the last bullet, because once you have a running business with that revenue model that I had before, where there's money coming in every month, and that's sort of organically growing by itself, you've won, in a sense. You have a self-supporting enterprise. It's paying all of its expenses. It's throwing off some cash, and it has increasing revenues, increasing profits. You can then apply your MBA skills, figure out how to make it 1,000 times bigger. But once you are ready to succeed at that point. If you can get to that point, if at that point you want investment, people will fall all over themselves to offer you an investment in a company which has a proven ability to generate revenues.
What was the timeline in your example of essentially getting to break even point?
We lived for 5 years, and I don't remember the exact details, and I think if I did, they might actually be covered by an NDA. But I can tell you the approximate story, which is that for the first few years, yeah, it was a lot of hard work that we didn't really get paid for. And then we reached a level where we had customer traction, and there was money flowing. We were hiring people. It was up and running. To kind of put the kind of chart. I mean, you've all seen charts like this, right? Right. That's kind of how this is. Everybody hopes that they're going to do that. The reality is these are some hard years to get started, and then you kind of get where this is getting big enough that you're growing, and then you hit some point where you realize that you're turning the corner. And we actually sold the company at that point, so I don't know what the story would have been going up that chart. But yeah, the answer is that if you're bootstrapping any kind of business, software or service or otherwise, the first few years are going to be a slog. They're going to be a hard road. And if you're not in a position to do that, then you probably shouldn't take the approach I put up here. You probably should go to one of these other sessions and learn how to get some investment capital so you can actually get a decent paycheck along the way. Okay, I don't want to go past 5 till, so I'll take several minutes, whatever anybody wants to ask about.
I've got one question. How did you take approach in picking the market? Was it
we picked a
everything,
market.
or did you focus somewhere?
We picked a market. You can read it if you get with me. You can look at my website. You can find it over there. But we picked a vertical market we knew about because we had done consulting work in that vertical market.
Okay.
Going around it again, I would probably spend more energy picking a market. I think that of my diagram up there, how long that first section is depends critically on the market you picked. You asked that? Okay. That pick a market, which is big enough to have a decent amount of paying customers, small enough that it's not attracting really big, super funded ventures. Now, don't ever write software in a market that Microsoft wants in, for example. And a market where the established competitors have some obvious weaknesses that you can beat. And I think that there's actually a large number of vertical markets that suit that description very, very well, because vertical markets are almost always occupied by kind of weak systems that have been around for 20 years. We whimsically described our business model as, we're going to bring 1990s technology to this industry. And this was in 2000-something. So we realized that bringing 1990s technology would actually be a huge improvement over many of the existing systems. So I would actually try to choose, I would recommend spending a lot of your energy choosing really carefully what market you want to be in. More.
I know you've got a few minutes, so you were going to try and touch on marketing a social or a software as a service model. Could you give a few moments on that?
I'll give you my number one point on it. We want a lot of business on one simple thing. You could go to our website, you could read a whole bunch of stuff about our product, you could understand if it met your needs, and you could see how much it was going to cost. You could do all that by reading our website. And customers did that, and they called us up like asking for a contract so they could sign it. The opposite of that is, I believe all of our competitors had traditional sort of marketing-driven websites that had like a bunch of pages, a whole lot about the features and benefits, which is bullet points of features, glossy language about the benefits, and nothing about the actual software. You can't learn anything about it, no idea what it costs without calling for a rep. I believe we actually grabbed a lot of business of people who had already sold themselves on our product before they even would have called one of our competitors to give that competitor the opportunity to start a sales process. So
the biggest difference was give them a window into what your software does versus feature. Or
the way that what I'm describing is basically a software version of a principle that direct mail people have known forever, which is long copy sells. If you talk to successful direct mail people, they will almost always say that long copy sells, and I found the same thing to be the case selling software on websites. Now, I might be wrong, and maybe if I had done extensive A/B testing, I would have been better off without detailed information on my website, but that was my experience, is that if you have a good offering and you communicate its goodness with screen videos, with words, with images, all those things, and you do a little bit of advertising so that some of your target market people find their way to it, and it's obviously better than the competitors, a certain number of them are just going to find it and they're going to call you up and order it. I mean, it's kind of primitive, trivial advice, but
sure.
Was your product vertical enough that it wouldn't have made sense to allow them to just sign up and to be done on the site? There was some contract process that had to go through.
Yeah, we were in a utility-related industry, and
it's not going to happen.
They don't like these guys. They don't want to sign up with their credit card. Nobody. It's the business. They're not signing up on behalf of themselves. Online credit card sign-up processes, those are great for selling to tiny little businesses. Tiny little businesses don't have much money. To get money from real businesses, significant businesses, like they're going to want to look at a contract and sign it, and they're going to want to get bills and pay checks. And it's a real pain to deal with because you have all the AR issues. But like big companies do not sign up for the software that they run their company on.
On the Amex?
On Billy Bob's Amex. Like it's just not part of the process. Okay, I'm going to be done. We can talk offline later, but I'm committed to not keeping you late. So thank you.